This is Monocle on Fashion, a new show on Monocle Radio dedicated to the inner workings of the fashion industry. I'm your host, Natalie Theodosi. On today's episode, we're speaking to Clare Waight Keller, the newly appointed creative director of Uniqlo. Few designers have had a career trajectory as varied and impressive as Clare Waight Keller. After graduating from the Royal College of Arts in London, she began working for Calvin Klein and Ralph Lauren in the US. Then it was off to Milan, where she worked for Gucci during its Tom Ford heyday, closely followed by Paris, where she became artistic director of Chloe and Givenchy. She was behind some of the most successful Chloe collections, bringing the Parisian house back to its bohemian roots. While at Givenchy, she doubled down on tailoring and helped re-establish the house's couture atelier. She was also the designer behind a very famous royal wedding dress back in 2018. After taking a moment to pause and reflect during the pandemic, she has now taken on a brand new challenge, working for the Japanese high street giant that is Uniqlo. When I asked Claire how she adapts so easily to different companies and price points, at the time when the industry stands behind this notion of the designer genius with a singular vision, she tells me about the importance of not having a big ego as a creative and thinking about the heritage of the company you're working for, as well as the needs of your customer. Her grounded approach and pragmatism are a breath of fresh air. As she takes on this newly created role at Uniqlo, she has become even more focused on thinking about servicing customers' needs on a global scale and using Uniqlo's resources to innovate. As someone who has been living in the suits she has designed for her Uniqlo C line for months, I can tell you that it's certainly working. We also speak about her recent trips to Japan and what we should expect to see in Uniqlo's shop floors around the world come next year. Let's hear from Clare Waight Keller, creative director at Uniqlo.
It's a global director role at Uniqlo, and that means that I oversee basically everything that you look at in the store, except for the kids. I'm not involved in the kids' wear, but all the men's, all the women's, all the socks, everything that you regularly see in a Uniqlo store, I now look at as part of my design remit. So this role was something that kind of organically grew as I've been starting to work with Uniqlo over the last couple of years. We had launched my collaboration collection last September, but previous to that, I'd actually been working with the group for about a year, planning that collaboration, doing the collection design and also naming it, doing all the labeling, trademarking, everything else that we need to do to prep a launch for a new collaboration. And so as part of that process, I was spending a lot of time in Tokyo and with the team in Ariake, which is near the port in Tokyo, where the big Uniqlo offices are. And at that stage, you're kind of seeing a lot of things around the office of what they do on a global scale. And I started to just get involved in a lot of the meetings and discussions. And so it grew from conversations from there. And then we started talking about, well, actually, it could be interesting to look at this as a whole big opportunity because the brand itself is so well loved and also has such an incredible reputation. And they are one of the few brands on the high street who is really known for innovation. And so that, for me, was the big draw.
And why? I mean, you mentioned innovation. I'm sure that was a big draw and how loved the brand is. But I think it was still a very unexpected move for someone who made their career in luxury. Why did you decide to take a very different turn? I think your name was on everyone's lips as there's so many open positions in luxury houses. They were wondering if you would take one of them, if you'd be interested in returning to that world. And then you surprised everyone by taking on this new role at Uniqlo.
I think for me, I've always taken quite surprising moves in my career. And I think over the last decade or two, many people have said, oh my God, I didn't expect you to come show up there. And I think that's part of what I search for and what I look for is the surprise, is the challenge, is the thing that is completely off-piste in a way, because that makes for one, an interesting journey for me, but it also brings interesting challenges. And I think as a designer, it's very easy to go from the same type of job to another type of job. You're just doing it in a different umbrella. And as much as that's really an amazing career move as well, it also is something quite familiar. And so for me, I'm always really looking to be out of my comfort zone because that's where you learn the most. And I think, you know what? You're only on this planet for a short amount of time, and I just want to make it as interesting as possible.
And looking at your trajectory, like you say, you sometimes go off piste. You even within the luxury world, you've worked for such different companies, and that shows you put the brand in many ways first, or the customer, than your own singular vision, which is a very different way from the way that many other designers work. How would you manage to do that?
Not having a giant ego is one.
Yeah, I was going to say it's a very ego-driven approach usually with designers. Wherever they go, they bring themselves and their image and their vision, while you kind of adapt to, you have your own signature, but it feels like you adapt much more to the customer that you're addressing and to the business that you work for.
100%. And I think actually that's one of the things there's one, well, he's passed now, but the one designer that I got to know very well while I was living in Paris, Karl Lagerfeld. And I always admired his kind of chameleon approach to working for different brands. And obviously he eventually did have his own brand, but it was never very significant because people felt his actual most significant work was what he did for other brands such as Chanel and Fendi and Chloe as well, which is where I first started talking to him, was when I was at Chloe, and we connected obviously from being at our time there. And for me, I really admired the fact that he morphed each time, and it was always really surprising what he was going to do, and it was different at each brand. And I think he was truly one of those designers who did try to immerse himself in the storytelling of the brand and then bring his own flavor to it. And I feel like I'm the same way. I'm not a designer that just imposes my look on a brand. Yes, there are certain designers that we can see today who you know what you're getting when they move to another brand. And that's reassuring for a lot of people, and it's great too. That's a different approach. But I like immersing myself in the story of a house and then trying to thread a new chapter in terms of what its cultural relevance is right now. So why brands such as when I went to Givenchy should be relevant, and what I'm bringing to it, and what's the new chapter that I'm taking there. It's not my chapter, it's the company's chapter. The company's going to be around much longer than I am. So for me, it's about really translating that and making it relevant to that moment in time.
And I think we do need a lot more people like you in the industry, a lot more designers that have a little less ego and are a lot more adjustable. What do you think?
Well, it's definitely something that's very rare, say, in our industry right now. And, you know, it's part of, maybe this is just my point of view, the lack of women in the industry. I think women naturally put their brand first. And I think we have a different approach and a different way of designing. I think it's very customer-centric in that sense, and I know people don't think customers are sexy to talk about, but ultimately they're the people who buy your product. And, you know, just having a vision of a model as your only idea of what is the true vision of your brand, I find very limiting. And I do think it's important to have a really wide perspective. Women come in all shapes and sizes, and we all like variety and something different. And I do think that that's the unique aspect that women designers bring to the table, is that we do think broadly and we're less single-minded in our vision, I would say.
And if we go back to Uniqlo, last time we were speaking about the launch of Uniqlo C, you said that one of the biggest changes from working for someone like Givenchy to Uniqlo, you're thinking about a much broader range of customers, climates, body shapes. How has that changed your approach to design and the way you think about a collection?
Well, it's interesting because it's changed it vastly, actually, because when you suddenly see your dress on extra small all the way to a triple XL, you really view it differently. And quite honestly, I sit there and I go, I want to make it look amazing on every size. So I will then review what I've done and say, well, actually, I'd like to add some more shape to the upper back, or I'd like to give it a little bit more hip volume. And that's because I am seeing it on all these different sized women. And it's just not fair to just say, well, then they should just wear a stretch dress. That's lazy design. I think we have to think that everybody does come in diverse sort of shapes and sizes and cultural backgrounds. And so we need to adapt as designers. That's why you're a designer, is because you have an ability to create and be really thoughtful about the product you're using, in the same way that someone who's designing a chair would think about the different shapes of people who are going to sit in a chair, and that you need to support the back, and that you need to have the height from the floor correct so that you don't get your legs floating around. So there are all these things that as designers we are supposed to find solutions to problems and to do it aesthetically beautifully if we can.
And you've already had a lot of success with Uniqlo C, your line for the brand. You've launched menswear as well for the last drop. Tell me, what have you learned since launching those initial lines, and what's next? Because this is going to be ongoing, right?
It is, yeah. No, I'm excited for the next few seasons to come through. I think for me, the big thing has been the reaction. It's been amazing, and especially with the men's launch, actually in September, was just an extraordinary kind of big exposure to the market for my first men's collection, and it was a hugely overwhelming reaction. I mean, things selling out in a week and waitlist, and just the sort of reaction around the world was fantastic. So I was really excited about that, and it makes you start to then think even more what you can do and play in terms of fabrics and proportions. And also the fact that we have that innovation side that's going to be a big part of what I'll be doing over the next few years as well.
I've been living in the suits from the September drop, so I can attest that it is very successful and people are loving it. When it comes to now the role for the main line, how are we going to see your signature, aside from Uniqlo C, to the rest of the Uniqlo products and the shops? What should we expect to see in the next few months now that you've taken on the new role as well?
I think the biggest change you'll see is colour, for sure. That's very much an easy one that I'm working on constantly. And that even on those classic lines, which we really very rarely touch that much, colour is the one thing that I can really sort of across every area sort of add my touch. So especially this season, you'll notice if you go in the store, the cashmere palette, there's like 50 shades, and I selected every one of those. So those are big categories that you definitely will see a big impact. But then in addition, there's going to be all of the seasonal new shapes. So there'll be new pant silhouettes coming in, or there'll be new ultralight block text. There's a new puff tech coming in, which is a replacement for down. And we've managed to get the technology now to be as performant and as close to down as you could possibly get, which obviously from a more environmentally friendly point of view we're really trying to work towards. And just on that note, as much as possible we're also trying to introduce recycle programs as well. Our biggest issue with that is actually people not donating enough, if you can believe it. The issue is supply. We just don't have enough to recycle. So anyone who has any extra nylons or down, please bring them to a Uniqlo store and we will make you a new one.
And what's interesting, I mean, you're speaking about really beautiful materials, innovation, carefully constructed silhouettes. And I think it raises an interesting conversation about luxury and what it is, because I don't think it equates to a price tag anymore. And something like what you do at Uniqlo almost creates a new definition of luxury. And you see a lot of customers that might be buying a 10,000 euro bag also coming to Uniqlo and buying the cashmere jumpers that you're designing. Tell me, especially now with everything going on in the industry, how should we be redefining what luxury is and who is that customer?
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think that's where it's at right now. The high and the low is actually how I see so many people dressing, because a lot of luxury is quite unaffordable. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of people who love fashion and just simply can't afford to buy it. And I think there is, of course, the second-hand market, which is an additional sort of area that is a great place to shop. But I also do think there are those really well-made, well-priced kind of value pieces, such as the Uniqlo urbanism t-shirt or the cashmere that, I mean, I've been buying Uniqlo cashmere for 10 years now, and it's a really great product and it just lasts so long. It's still in perfect condition. And so the only thing I would be doing is adding, because I like a new colour or I want a slightly different proportion. So I might be buying a small size this year rather than an oversized last year. And so it is a new adjustment to the way people are looking at brands. And I think there's been an interesting shift that the high street is really trying to raise their bar in terms of their image, in terms of the people they collaborate with, even down to photographers and stylists. So you're really seeing that there is less and less discrepancy in image, let's say, between luxury and the high street. Maybe there are still some in obviously in quality, but it really depends on how you put it together.
And why would you say that this is happening now on the high street? What's changed?
I think everyone is inspired by luxury, of course. You know, the top end of the tree is always the most, glossy, lovely, sparkly place. But it's the fact that it takes a long time to be able to save up and buy something from there. Or you're going to think twice for something that has a really very strong trend shape. And you're thinking, gosh, I'm spending £1,000 on something that might actually be out of date in 6 months as a shape, let's say. And so now, there's still a real yearning, I think, from the younger generation, so from Gen Z and millennials, to want to look great and enjoy fashion and maybe experiment and style themselves in different ways. And you want to do it with slightly less financial risk, let's say. So I think this has opened up a big opportunity for brands at this level. And I think that's why, for me, it was really interesting to come and work at Uniqlo, because if I can add that level of design for a great price, it's an amazing thing to offer to more people. There are so many fans of my work over the last 10 years who have often said to me, oh my God, I loved your collection. I just hope I can buy one piece one day. And I felt really sad about that, sometimes. I'm thinking, gosh, that is true. A lot of people just can't. And now I have people coming up to me and say, I bought 5 things. I'm so excited. I got like a whole new look for the season. And to me, that's hugely rewarding.
And for someone, like you said, you worked in haute couture ateliers and now on the high street, is there a common thread between the things that you consider make good design and good style as well?
I think there is. I mean, I genuinely look at a lot of the Uniqlo product and I can't believe the quality for the price. And I sit there in meetings in Tokyo saying, how much is this? Really? You can do this level of quality? I mean, completely unconstructed tailored jackets, unlined, that if you show me an Italian one, did a blind test, let's say like the ice cream test where you don't know which brand it is. I genuinely would look at things and say, I wouldn't be able to necessarily tell you which one was Italian made and which was Far East made. And I think that's just because the quality standards that Uniqlo sort of abides by are so high. It's even surprised me, myself. I look at things and I just am genuinely really floored at the sort of attention to detail, the preciseness and the beauty that they put into things. And I think that's a cultural thing as well, which is why also as a designer it's amazing to work in Tokyo, because I'm sort of obsessed with Japan and everything to do with the Japanese culture. But yes, it's a kind of an extraordinary time right now, because, you know, where we used to look down on the Far East as kind of cheap manufacturing, they're very skilled people now. And that's because we've been teaching them for 20 years. So at this point, they have as much knowledge as most European manufacturers do.
I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Japan, because I find it so fascinating. You've worked everywhere from the US, Italy, France, now Japan, and you live in the UK. What has it been like culture-wise to work with a Japanese company in terms of their approach to how they do business, their manufacturing and quality standards? I think we have a lot to learn from Japan, right? So what has been your experience so far?
For sure, the number one thing is discipline. So disciplined. And I think that's obviously something that's instilled very young, but it's definitely part of their culture as private people as well as professional people. But it's the discipline that makes for that very qualitative and very reassuring product. You know that whenever something goes through their hands, no one's going to let something drop along the way. It's very, very precisely checked. Everything is double, triple checked, and they question everything. So there is a real ownership, I would say, in the whole process. So each person in the chain knows that they have to do their job incredibly diligently. And I think that's also from the slightly slower approach that they take with developing their collection. So unlike a lot of other fast fashion companies that might be launching many tens or hundreds of products a week, Uniqlo doesn't. So we're only launching 250 products per 6 months. So a small amount. It's just actually the quantity of colours and variety of pieces and then the buy globally is what gives it scale. It's not actually by the churn. It's not by constantly throwing new things at the store. It's really very, very precisely thought out and very, very well merchandised.
And have you been enjoying more frequent trips to Tokyo and also all around the world to show the collection, visit the stores? Has there been a big change of pace in your life since
Yeah,
then?
definitely. I mean, I'm out in Tokyo every 2 months, more or less, which is great. So I've seen it in almost all the seasons now, which is lovely. It's an amazing country. Tokyo's an incredible capital city. And if you told me 20 years ago you're going to end up in Tokyo, I would have said, no, there's just no way. But to be able to have now genuinely said that I've worked in every fashion capital in the world is kind of quite a feat, I think.
I don't think many people can claim that.
No.
Even in our very fast kind of world of fashion.
True. It's really moving quite quickly. But in that sense, I can really say that, I spent a lot of time in each of the capitals between New York, Milan, Paris, London, and now Tokyo. And each is so different. But I love that. I love the fact that it's a really interesting journey each time.
Yeah, and I guess it also goes back to being adjustable and learning from different cultures, different customers, rather than keeping to one more singular vision, which is rare and very much needed. I also wanted to ask you a little bit more broadly about what's happening in the industry. You decided to kind of go off-piste, like you said earlier, and go into the high street, taking on this role. And in that sector of the market, there is a lot more, like you said, upping the ante. In the luxury world, I think there's a little bit more uncertainty still happening and a lot of questions being raised, a little bit of a slowdown. What do you think is the reason behind all of that? And what do you hope to see? We're heading into a new year. What do you hope to see for the industry as a whole?
I mean, I think there's a big readjustment that needs to happen. Obviously, COVID created this massive growth spurt for everybody, and I think everyone enjoyed that tremendously. And from that, almost created this sort of feeling of cresting on a wave, just like, this is great, we're all surfing, we're growing, it's great. And sometimes you don't see when it's suddenly going to, crash and fall, because you're sort of on the wave and it feels like it's all happening. I do think there needs to be somewhat of an adjustment. And I think that comes to going back to brands and understanding why people love that brand, really tapping more into why should that brand exist? It's the classic questions that if you're in brand marketing, you ask, the why are you there? What's the reason that you're doing what you're doing, and why would people buy it? And those are the things that you have to answer concretely. And it's not enough just to do a new T-shirt. It's like, why would they buy the Uniqlo T-shirt over another T-shirt? And I think there's been an area of fashion where just putting a brand name on something was enough. And I think that's certainly played out really well. But maybe we need to look back at design now, and we have to look at those reasons that are more deeply intrinsic in a product of why you want to buy it and how it links back to the brand. And yes, there's always going to be an element of the status that people love about buying brands. But ultimately, you want something qualitative too.
And like you said, there's been a long period of people just riding the wave, going from one job to the next and kind of continuously moving. And you didn't do that. You took some time between your post at Givenchy and now this very full-on position at Uniqlo. Is there a benefit to taking a break, especially when you're in this creative world, clearing your mind and then making another move?
For that particular moment in time, yes, for me, it was exactly the right time. More because COVID was just an extraordinary phenomenon that none of us had ever had to encounter before. And I don't think anyone would have predicted early 2020 where we would be now. I think it was a real doomsday scenario when COVID first hit. And I think everyone was trying to grapple with, what's the landscape going to look like? And I don't know if you remember, but for a period of time anyway, everybody thought shows will never happen again. We're all going to go digital.
I remember no shows, no physical shops, right?
Yeah, the retail's dead. All these commentaries that were happening, which obviously didn't come true. And so it was a good time to step out and just observe for a while. And really, for me, it was quite a reflective moment to see what I've been part of for the last 20 years and kind of look to the future. For me, I was thinking, actually, where is fashion going to go over the next 10 to 15 years? And where do I see the biggest interest and growth? And I have to say, for me, it was Asia. And I think I'd spent so much time in sort of Western markets and in Western companies. And all the time I was in these companies, we were looking to the East, but never being part of the East. And I feel that there's been a sort of blanket kind of phrase that's always put on Asia, like, oh, Asia is Asia. And it's not true. Asia is so vastly different. You can equate it to Europe in the fact that, us Brits are very different to the Italians, are very different to Ukrainians, are different to Irish. It's the same in Asia. Each country in Asia is hugely different in terms of its cultural awareness, in terms of its trends, in terms of the way they wear clothes. And I just feel that I wanted to understand that more deeply. And I also think there's a lot of exciting things happening in Asia right now.
And that goes beyond manufacturing, right, which is what we've usually looked to Asia for. What are some of the things that you are excited about or that we should be looking to Asia for?
Well, I think everybody thinks about manufacturing and technology. Those are the two things that come up when you talk about Asia. And usually the general trope is, cheap manufacturing, which is not true anymore, and then technology. And where it was for many decades in Japan, it's obviously switched to China and Korea. But still, there is a understanding that is really, really vast over there in terms of the future and technology. And if anything, they are more open-minded and also much more experimental, I feel. And I think it's because they have a comfort level with development, because they have been nations who've constantly had to evolve and develop, and they go at a fast pace. So in Europe, where we would probably be considered a little more sleepy in the way we approach things, and certainly manufacturing is very slow here. Over in Asia, it's really dynamic. And I think the emergence of K-pop, K-beauty, but also the restaurant scene out there, the way the cities have been developed, the architects that are working out there, there's just a lot happening. So it feels quite dynamic.
Being in Art Basel recently, where a lot of fashion brands were also involved, some of the conversation also veered around storytelling and how it is important to include non-Western perspectives in that side of the business now that fashion is completely global, and we're talking about very global brands. They're no longer reserved to Europe or to their sort of original homes.
Yeah. It's true. And I think there's a pride in Asia as well for where they've come from. And I think it's not represented in the West, quite honestly. And so I do think it's interesting to look at what they're doing over there and realise there's actually great value in what they can bring to the table.
And just to kind of wrap it up, now that you've, like you said, taken a break, had a time to reflect and have this exciting new role, what are sort of some of your biggest ambitions when you look at 2025 and this dialogue that you're starting between Europe and Asia and your way of designing?
Well, I think definitely for me, there's always going to be those partnerships that I have with the fabric suppliers in developing new technology into fabrics. But also for me, the excitement comes from my collaboration collection, bringing each season something fresh and more fashion forward than the main line for sure, but still with that Uniqlo ethos of being those perfect pieces, the timeless things that can work from season to season. And I think I'm just going to build on that each collection, and especially now menswear coming, I think I'm excited to do that even more.
I think people, as the seasons go and people pick something from each season, it's almost like you can build a whole wardrobe from Uniqlo C, which is super exciting.
Yeah, that was part of my intention as I started. I wanted to make sure that, for instance, if I was doing grey, that the greys would work together. So you can buy it from the first collection and it would still be working, the same grey would work harmoniously with the third collection. And I think this is something that's maybe not necessarily thought about a lot in fashion, is that people do kind of repeat shop, and it is a little annoying when things don't match or they don't work together. So actually maybe doing something where you have that sort of lovely ease to everything that you pull together, like, well, I know it's going to work, and I'll buy that and that because I know it will work with my items from the first collection. I think there's something nice about that thread, that continuity. It brings something very harmonious and a nice rhythm.
That was Clare Waight Keller, Creative Director of Uniqlo. And that's all for today's show. Make sure you subscribe and stay tuned. We have more big interviews and exclusive insights into the world of fashion planned for the rest of the year. Our first season is brought to you by our friends at My Theresa Men, the global retailer offering the finest edit in luxury. Today's episode was produced and edited by Lily Austin. I'm Natalie Theodosi. Thank you for listening.